At 56, the story of Will Smith has taken a turn that no one ever saw coming. Known for his laughter, his energy, and his unforgettable performances, he's now facing a tragedy that feels almost too heavy to put into words. Fans who grew up watching him on screen are stunned, and the reality of his situation has left many in disbelief. Behind the fame, behind the bright smile, lies a heartbreak so deep it's shaking everyone who hears it. Will Smith's story doesn't start with flashing cameras or red carpets. It begins in the quiet, tense rooms of his childhood home in Philadelphia, where laughter often had to fight its way through fear. He grew up in a family that looked stable on the outside, but inside there were storms no child should have to face. His father was strict, often harsh, and one night when Will was just 9 years old, he saw his father hit his mother. That moment froze him in place. He later admitted that he felt like a coward for not stepping in. The shame from that night didn't fade. It carved itself into his heart, a wound he carried into adulthood. For Will, the way to survive that kind of environment was humor. He discovered early on that if he could make people laugh, he could ease the tension in the room. Jokes became his shield, a way to distract himself and others from the pain. Slowly, that shield turned into a gift. By the time he was a teenager, it wasn't just his family who appreciated it. His friends, teachers, and anyone who crossed his path felt his energy. He had charisma that couldn't be ignored, a spark that seemed to light up every room he walked into. That spark grew when he teamed up with his childhood friend DJ Jazzy Jeff. Together, they created music that wasn't about anger or violence, but about fun, joy, and everyday life. Their playful style set them apart in a rap world dominated by harder, grittier voices. It was different, and people loved it. Parents didn't mind their kids blasting it, and kids connected with it because it was real and relatable. By his early 20s, Will had already made history by winning the first Grammy ever given for rap. But fame wasn't just about the music. Soon, television came calling. The chance to star in The Fresh Prince of Bel-Air changed his life forever. On screen, he wasn't just a character, he was himself, weaving his humor, pain, and charm into every line. The world fell in love with him, not just as an actor, but as a person. Behind the jokes and the swagger, there was always a hint of the boy who had once felt powerless. From those scars came the drive to succeed, and from that drive came stardom. Will Smith's rise wasn't just about talent. It was about transforming pain into power, fear into laughter, and brokenness into a story that millions could connect with. His smile became his signature, but beneath it was a reminder that even the brightest lights can be born from the darkest places. Will Smith's climb to the top of Hollywood didn't happen overnight, but when it did happen, it felt like a rocket launch. One moment he was the goofy, magnetic star of The Fresh Prince of Bel-Air, and the next, he was standing on the biggest stages in the world, holding his place as one of the most bankable stars of all time. The rise was thrilling, but the higher he went, the heavier the weight became. When The Fresh Prince ended in the mid-90s, Will could have easily stayed in the safe zone of sitcoms or smaller projects, but he wasn't built for small. He had something inside him, an urgency to prove himself, not just as a funny kid from Philly, but as someone who could command the screen in every way. Hollywood gave him that chance with Bad Boys in 1995. The film exploded. Will wasn't just funny, he was tough, charismatic, and believable as an action star. Suddenly, he was no longer just the Fresh Prince. He was a new kind of movie star, someone who could mix comedy with danger, swagger with heart. Then came Independence Day. This was the moment the whole world realized just how big Will Smith could be. He wasn't just acting in a movie, he was carrying it. Saving the world from aliens with one-liners that audiences repeated for years, he became the kind of star who didn't just play a role, but defined it. The film made hundreds of millions at the box office, and with it, Will's place in Hollywood shifted permanently. He was no longer the kid who stumbled into acting. He was now one of the faces of global cinema. The streak continued with Men in Black. It was another monster hit, and once again, Will brought his unique energy, serious when it needed to be, hilarious when it didn't. With every release, his fame grew. By the late 90s, he wasn't just a star, he was the star. He had a formula that seemed unstoppable. Blockbuster films, hit soundtracks, often performed by him, and a charm that won over audiences across age groups and culture. His music and movies combined into a powerhouse that nobody else was pulling off at that level. But the higher he climbed, the more pressure weighed on his shoulders. Success became expected. Every summer blockbuster season, people looked to him to deliver. He was the man studios trusted to bring in hundreds of millions. For Will, that pressure wasn't just business, it was personal. He had grown up with scars from childhood, carrying guilt and a need to protect, to succeed, to never let anyone down. That drive pushed him harder, but it also began to eat away at him. Critics started to question if his films were too polished, too safe. They said he was more image than substance, that he smiled too much, that he wasn't raw enough. For someone who already carried the weight of proving himself, those words stung. Will wanted respect as an actor, not just as a star who made money. He turned to more serious roles that demanded more of him than just charisma and charm. Playing Muhammad Ali in Ali was a turning point. He trained like a fighter, lived like one, and nearly broke himself to honor the role. The performance earned him an Oscar nomination, but it also left him drained, both physically and emotionally. This was the paradox of his fame. The same charm that made him beloved also made people doubt his depth. To prove them wrong, he pushed himself harder. With The Pursuit of Happiness, he showed the world he could do more than save planets and crack jokes. He could make people cry, break their hearts, and inspire them in ways that went beyond spectacle. The role earned him another Oscar nomination, and for many, it was proof that Will wasn't just a blockbuster machine, he was an artist. But behind the triumphs was exhaustion. Fame doesn't pause. Once the machine starts running, it demands constant fuel. Another hit, another appearance, another perfect smile for the cameras. Will began to feel trapped by the very image that made him successful. He admitted later that he often felt invisible, that people saw Will Smith the superstar, but not Will the man. Every laugh, every grin on a red carpet was a mask, and behind it was someone longing to be understood. His career in the 2000s only grew bigger. Movies like I, Robot, I Am Legend, and Hancock kept him at the top of the box office. At one point, he had 8 consecutive films gross over $100 million. That kind of success made him untouchable in Hollywood. Studios wanted him because audiences trusted him. But with that trust came a cage. Will felt he couldn't fail. Every script he read, every choice he made, carried the weight of his reputation. And failure did come. Movies like After Earth with his son Jaden were panned, and the backlash was brutal. For someone who had built a career on being loved, the criticism cut deep. The image of perfection cracked, and suddenly people weren't just questioning his films, they were questioning him. Fame, once his crown, had become his chain. At the same time, his personal life was under constant scrutiny. His marriage to Jada Pinkett Smith was no longer just theirs, it was everyone's business. Rumors, headlines, interviews, all of it fed the public machine that wanted more than just his performances. They wanted his soul. And sometimes Will gave it. He admitted mistakes, spoke about struggles, and let people see glimpses of the scars beneath the smile. The glory of fame had brought him wealth, power, and the chance to inspire millions. But it also brought a constant pressure to perform, a spotlight that never dimmed, and a loneliness that applause couldn't cure. For Will, the rise to glory was real, but so was the weight. He carried it with the same determination he had carried as a child, trying to protect his mother. Shoulders heavy, smile bright, even when it hurt. In the end, his story of fame wasn't just about triumph. It was about survival. Survival in an industry that builds you up only to test how much weight you can carry before you break. And for Will Smith, the question was never just whether he could rise. It was whether he could carry the crown without letting it crush him. The night of the Oscars in 2022 was supposed to be Will Smith's crowning moment. After decades of climbing, fighting, and proving himself, he was about to be honored with the Academy Award for Best Actor for his role in King Richard. It should have been the highlight of his career, the night that secured his legacy forever. But instead, it became the moment that shook it to its core. What happened that evening will follow him for the rest of his life. Not just because of what he won, but because of what he lost in the very same hour. When Chris Rock made a joke about Jada Pinkett Smith, Will's face shifted. For a moment, he laughed with the crowd, but then he looked at Jada, saw her expression, and something inside him snapped. Years of pressure, years of criticism, years of carrying the weight of being Hollywood's hero. All of it erupted in seconds. He stood, walked toward the stage, and slapped Chris Rock across the face in front of millions of people watching live. The sound of the strike echoed louder than any applause he had ever received. Gasps filled the room. People sat frozen, unsure of what had just happened. Was it staged? Was it real? When Will returned to his seat and shouted from the audience, there was no doubt anymore. This wasn't a skit. This was a man unraveling in front of the world. And in that moment, the shine of his long-awaited Oscar victory was stolen. The fallout was immediate. Within hours, social media was on fire. Some defended Will, saying he was standing up for his wife. Others condemned him, calling the act a violent outburst that overshadowed an entire night meant to celebrate art. Memes spread like wildfire, jokes mixed with outrage, and suddenly, Will Smith's name wasn't trending for his award but for his mistake. The Academy quickly responded. Days later, Will resigned from the Academy of Motion Picture Arts and Sciences, a move that stunned many. Soon after, the Academy banned him from attending the Oscars or any of its events for 10 years. Projects he had lined up were quietly paused or canceled. Studios that once fought to work with him hesitated. The man who had been one of the most trusted and bankable stars in Hollywood suddenly felt radioactive. For Will, the punishment that hurt the most wasn't the ban, the headlines, or even the memes. It was the silence that followed. After decades of being adored, the absence of applause was deafening. He spoke later about how the moment became a scar he would carry for life. Not just because of what people saw, but because of how it forced him to face parts of himself he had avoided for years. Behind the public scandal, Will was already carrying private storms. His marriage to Jada had long been under the microscope, with rumors of separation, unconventional arrangements, and the infamous entanglement conversation that made headlines in 2020. That moment at the Oscars wasn't just about one joke. It was the breaking point of years of built-up tension, personal pain spilling into public spectacle. The scandal didn't just affect him, it rippled through his family. His children, already used to the scrutiny of fame, found themselves pulled into the chaos once again. Jada faced criticism, Chris Rock handled his own wave of attention, and the Smith family name became the center of debates about love, respect, violence, and celebrity culture. Will didn't run from the fallout. He faced it head-on, though the road was brutal. He released public apologies, some written, some in videos, where his voice trembled with regret. He admitted that he was wrong, that he had hurt people, not just Chris Rock but also his fans, his peers, and his family. There was no attempt to excuse it. He simply said he had failed, and he carried the shame with him. But reflection doesn't erase action. Hollywood is a place that remembers. For every fan who forgave him, another questioned whether they could ever see him the same way. For every voice that praised his honesty, another whispered that the image of Will Smith, the smiling hero who saved the world on screen, was forever broken. And yet, scandal has a strange way of revealing the humanity behind the legend. For years, Will had seemed untouchable. Perfect family, perfect career, perfect smile. The slap shattered that illusion. Suddenly, he wasn't the invincible star anymore. He was a man who lost control, who cracked under the pressure, who made a mistake as raw and human as any other. In interviews after the storm, he spoke openly about how the slap forced him to look at himself in a way he never had before. He talked about the weight of his childhood, about the guilt he carried since watching his father hit his mother, about the anger that had always lived under his smile. The slap in many ways wasn't just about Chris Rock. It was about all the scars that had shaped him since he was a boy. Reflection became his survival. He admitted to feeling like he had let everyone down, but he also said he was determined to learn from it, to grow. Slowly he began rebuilding, not by chasing the spotlight, but by focusing on his family, his health, and his own peace. The scandal of the Oscars didn't end Will Smith's career, but it changed it forever. He will always be remembered for his triumphs, but that night will forever be a part of his story. It was the moment the world stopped seeing only the legend and saw the flawed, fragile man underneath. And in that sense, the fall was also a strange kind of freedom. For the first time, Will didn't have to pretend to be perfect. The mask was gone. What remained was someone still capable of rising, but now rising with scars fully visible. His glory had cracks, but maybe those cracks would be the place where his truest light could finally shine. After the Oscars in 2022, Will Smith's world felt like it had been flipped upside down. What should have been the night of his greatest victory quickly turned into the night of his greatest shame. He had finally won the Academy Award for Best Actor, something he had chased for decades, but almost no one was talking about the trophy. They were talking about the slap. Overnight, the man who had spent his whole career building an image as one of Hollywood's most likable stars became the center of controversy. His crown felt shattered, his legacy questioned. And the question on everyone's mind was simple: could he come back from this? The months after the Oscars were some of the hardest of his life. Projects he had already signed on to were put on pause or quietly shelved. Studios hesitated. Friends and fans didn't know how to react. The silence was heavy, not only from Hollywood, but also inside himself. Will admitted later that he replayed the moment over and over in his mind, haunted by what he had done. He wasn't just ashamed of the act, he was terrified that it erased everything he had worked for. The smile that once lit up the screen now felt like a mask he could no longer wear. But Will Smith is no stranger to falling and rebuilding. This wasn't the first time he'd been knocked down. From the IRS troubles that left him broke in his early 20s, to the career setbacks that forced him to reinvent himself, his life had always been a mix of scars and second chances. The Oscars scandal, though, was different. It wasn't a private problem, it was a global humiliation. Rebuilding this time wouldn't be about money or roles, it would be about trust, dignity, and proving to the world, and to himself, that he was more than one mistake. He began with apologies, public, raw, and at times painful to watch. In one video, his voice trembled as he admitted how deeply sorry he was, not only to Chris Rock, but to everyone who looked up to him. "I was wrong," he said, and the words carried no performance, no polish, only the weight of shame. For some people, it wasn't enough. For others, it showed a side of Will they had never seen before: vulnerable, fragile, willing to own his mistakes. Instead of hiding, he chose honesty. His memoir, Will, released just months before the Oscars, had already pulled back the curtain on his scars. In it, he revealed the pain of his childhood, the fear he carried after watching his father hit his mother, the guilt that haunted him for freezing in that moment as a boy. Readers who picked up the book after the slap began to see a fuller picture. The anger on stage that night wasn't random. It was the eruption of wounds buried for decades. It didn't excuse it, but it explained it. For the first time, people saw not just the superstar, but the broken boy still living inside him. Healing didn't happen overnight. It came slowly, through small steps. He focused on his family. He spent more time with his children, mending bonds and being present in ways fame had often stolen from him. Trey, his son from his first marriage, had once been distant, but now their relationship grew stronger. Willow and Jaden, who had faced their own struggles with fame, found in their father someone more open, more real, someone who could finally admit when he was hurting. Even with Jada, despite their long and complicated marriage, he found ways to keep showing up, to keep choosing connection even when the foundation was fragile. Professionally, the road back was uncertain. His first big project after the Oscars was Emancipation, a powerful drama about slavery. It was the kind of film that could have been another career-defining moment, but instead it was released into silence. Critics acknowledged his performance, but the scandal overshadowed everything. The film was quietly pushed aside, not because it wasn't good, but because the world wasn't ready to embrace him again. For many, it was proof of how hard redemption in Hollywood can be. But Will didn't stop. 2 years later, he returned with Bad Boys 4, and this time the reception was different. Audiences flocked to theaters, and the film grossed over $400 million, 0 cents worldwide. It was a reminder that charisma like his doesn't just vanish. Fans who'd grown up with him in the 90s still wanted to see him, still wanted to cheer for him. The film didn't erase the past, but it proved something important. There was still space for Will Smith in Hollywood. Even after the fall, music became another outlet for rebuilding. In 2025, after nearly 2 decades away, he released a new album, based on a true story. It wasn't just a return to rap, it was a confession. One track, Beautiful Scars, stood out as the heartbeat of the record. In it, Will didn't hide from his pain, he embraced it. He told the world that scars are not signs of weakness, but proof of survival. For fans who had followed his journey, the song was more than music, it was a message. A reminder that even when life breaks you, you can rebuild with the pieces. Outside of the spotlight, Will also rebuilt by turning to health and discipline. After a colonoscopy in 2019 revealed a precancerous polyp, he had already been forced to face his own mortality. That experience taught him that strength wasn't about looking invincible on screen. It was about taking care of the body and mind that had carried him through so much. In the years after the Oscars, he leaned into that lesson even more. Regular workouts, mindful eating, and routine checkups became his way of proving to himself that he wasn't giving up. At 56, he no longer lives with the same fire of youth, but with something deeper: perspective. He has wealth, yes, hundreds of millions in real estate, film earnings, and businesses. But money no longer defines him. He has fame, yes, but it comes with humility now. A recognition that the applause of the world is fleeting. What matters most to him now is balance. Family dinners, quiet mornings, forgiveness where it's possible, and creating art that carries meaning instead of just spectacle. Rebuilding hasn't been about restoring the image of perfection he once carried. It's been about embracing imperfection, about showing the world that even the brightest stars can stumble, and that stumbling doesn't have to be the end. The slap will always be part of his story. It will follow him in headlines and interviews, a scar that never fully fades. But scars don't erase life. They remind us of survival. For Will Smith, the second act of his life isn't about being flawless, it's about being real, about showing that greatness isn't the absence of failure, but the courage to rise after falling. His story now is not just about fame and glory, it's about scars, second chances, and the quiet strength it takes to keep moving forward, even when the world has seen you at your worst.